The security guard looked at me like I'd just crawled out from under a rock. His eyes swept from my faded jeans to my old cardigan, and I could practically see him calculating my net worth at about $12 and some pocket lint. He stepped forward, blocking my path to the Grand Meridian Hotel's main entrance with all the authority of someone who'd been doing this job for exactly 3 days. I told him I was here for the Wong Ashford engagement party, my daughter's engagement party, and the smirk that crossed his face could have curdled milk. He actually laughed, pointing his thick finger toward the side of the building where a small sign read, "Service Entrance." Apparently, a woman my age in casual clothes couldn't possibly be a guest. I must be the help. My name is Elizabeth Wong. I'm 58 years old, a widow, and at that moment, standing in my deliberately simple clothes, I probably looked like someone's housekeeper who'd gotten lost. The irony wasn't lost on me considering what I actually owned, but I kept my mouth shut. Sometimes the best revenge is served in courses, like a 5-star meal, and I was about to serve a feast. My daughter, Madison, had called me 2 weeks ago with the kind of forced cheerfulness that meant she was about to ask me something uncomfortable. "Mom," she'd said, her voice tight, "the Ashfords are very particular people. Old money, you know? Maybe you could, I don't know, dress up a little? And maybe don't mention your little online thing. They wouldn't understand internet jobs." My little online thing. That's what she called the business empire I'd built from nothing after her father died. The platform that had made me millions. The hotels I now owned. She had no idea. And whose fault was that? Mine, probably. I'd never told her. Never told anyone in the family. After Robert died 7 years ago, I was drowning in grief and medical bills. Madison was in college, so proud of her marketing degree, so sure she was going to conquer the world. I didn't want to burden her with the truth that we were broke, that her father's illness had eaten through our savings, that I was working 3 jobs just to keep her in school. So I started coding at night, built a booking platform for small hotels, sold it to a larger company, used that money to buy my first struggling property, then another, then another. 5 years later, I owned 17 hotels across the country, including the Grand Meridian chain. But to Madison, I was still just Mom, the widow who worked too much, who wore the same clothes for years, who lived in the same small house, who never seemed to have money for the nice things she wanted. The security guard was still staring at me, his radio crackling with importance. I could have shown him my ID, could have made one phone call that would have changed everything. But where was the fun in that? Instead, I smiled sweetly and headed toward the service entrance, my worn sneakers squeaking against the pavement. Just as I reached the side door, I heard a familiar voice shriek across the parking lot. Madison herself, resplendent in a dress that probably cost more than I used to make in a month, came clicking across the asphalt in heels that definitely weren't made for walking. Her face was a masterpiece of confusion and barely concealed horror. She looked right at me, then through me, then at the security guard who was explaining that he'd redirected the help to the proper entrance. Madison actually giggled, that nervous laugh she'd had since she was a teenager when she was embarrassed. She waved her manicured hand dismissively and said something about how these people always get confused about where they belong. These people, her own mother. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted copper and walked through that service entrance with my head held high. The kitchen was chaos. Pure, beautiful chaos that smelled like garlic and expensive beef Wellington. A sous chef immediately mistook me for the replacement server they'd been expecting and shoved an apron into my hands before I could protest. The head chef, a mountain of a man named Felipe who seemed to communicate entirely in French curse words and disappointed sighs, took one look at me and declared I was on shrimp duty. Within minutes, I was elbow deep in crustaceans, peeling and deveining like my life depended on it. The other kitchen staff barely noticed the new addition to their ranks. They were too busy gossiping about the disaster unfolding upstairs. Apparently, Madison had already sent 3 champagne deliveries back for not being champagne-colored enough, whatever that meant. The servers were taking bets on how many times she'd change her mind about the napkin arrangement. The current count was 6, and the party hadn't even officially started. I learned more about my daughter in that kitchen than I had in years of sporadic family dinners. She'd been terrorizing the staff for weeks with her demands, changing the menu 17 times, insisting that the flowers be flown in from Ecuador because local roses looked too pedestrian. One server mentioned she'd actually made the pastry chef cry over the engagement cake design, but the real information was about the Ashfords. Old money, they said. So old it had practically turned to dust. Mrs. Ashford had arrived earlier to inspect the venue and spent 40 minutes explaining how their family had been hosting parties since before the hotel was even built. She'd name-dropped so many dead relatives I thought we might need to set up a memorial table. Before I continue with what happened next, I want to pause for just a moment. If you've ever been invisible to your own children, if you've ever been judged for how you look instead of who you are, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. What city? What country? And if you've ever had to bite your tongue while someone you love treated you like a stranger, share that too. Because this story is about to get very interesting. Now let me tell you what happened when my daughter discovered the truth. The kitchen door burst open like someone had kicked it, and there stood Madison in all her glory. Her face was that particular shade of red that meant someone somewhere had done something unforgivable. She stormed through the kitchen, her heels clicking like angry typewriter keys, demanding to know why the champagne wasn't properly chilled to exactly 37.5 degrees. Felipe tried to explain that the champagne was at the perfect serving temperature, but Madison wasn't interested in facts. She wanted what she wanted, perfection that would impress the Ashfords. She swept past the prep station where I was wrist-deep in shrimp, close enough that I could smell her perfume, the same one I'd bought her for her birthday last year, the one she'd said was too cheap and never wore. She didn't even glance my way. To her, I was just another invisible pair of hands making her perfect day possible. After she hurricaned her way back out, one of the servers muttered that the Ashfords were already upstairs telling anyone who'd listen that their son could have done better. The kid washing dishes laughed and said he'd overheard Mrs. Ashford in the bathroom on the phone, discussing how to convince her son to call off the engagement before it was too late. I kept peeling shrimp, but my mind was racing. The Ashfords trying to sabotage my daughter's engagement, Madison being a terror to the staff who worked for me in my hotel without knowing it. This was turning into quite the show. I finished my shrimp duty, told Felipe I needed a bathroom break, and slipped out of the kitchen with my apron still on. The service elevator was empty, which was perfect because I needed a moment to collect myself. I pressed the button for the penthouse floor. Not the party floor, but the one above it. The executive level. My level. 7 years ago, after Robert died and the medical bills nearly bankrupted us, I'd taken every penny I had left and bet it all on myself. I learned to code, built a hotel booking platform from my kitchen table, while Madison was away at college, worked 18-hour days, ate ramen for dinner, wore the same 3 outfits for 2 years. The platform took off. I sold it for enough money to buy my first struggling hotel, fixed it up, made it profitable, bought another, then another. 3 years ago, I bought the Grand Meridian hotel chain. Not just this hotel, all 17 properties across the country. The deal had been conducted through my holding company, EW Enterprises, and I deliberately kept my personal name off most of the paperwork. It was cleaner that way, and it meant I could walk through my properties without being treated like the owner. You learn a lot about your business when people don't know you're the boss. The elevator opened to my private office suite, and I used my thumbprint to unlock the door. The space was everything the party downstairs wasn't. Quiet, minimalist, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. My assistant had left the weekly reports on my desk, but I wasn't interested in numbers right now. I was interested in the security monitors that showed every public area of the hotel. I flipped through the cameras until I found the ballroom. There they were, the Ashfords in all their glory. Mrs. Ashford looked like she'd been vacuum sealed into her dress, and her face had that peculiar tightness that suggested her plastic surgeon had been a bit enthusiastic. She was holding court near the bar, surrounded by women who all looked like they'd been ordered from the same country club catalog. And there, standing slightly apart from the crowd, was my daughter, my beautiful, foolish daughter who thought she needed to impress these people, who thought her mother wasn't good enough to be seen at her engagement party, who was about to learn a very expensive lesson about judging people by their clothes instead of their character. I changed out of my kitchen clothes and into the outfit I kept in my office, a simple but elegant black dress. Nothing flashy, just well-made and expensive in a way that people who knew quality would recognize. I fixed my hair, touched up my makeup, and looked at myself in the mirror. I looked like what I was, a successful businesswoman in her late 50s who'd built an empire from nothing, a widow who'd turned grief into gold, a mother who was about to crash her daughter's party. I took the main elevator down to the ballroom level. The doors opened, and I stepped out into the hallway where guests were mingling before the official party started. A few people glanced at me, but no one seemed to recognize the woman from the service entrance. Funny how a change of clothes can make you invisible or visible depending on what you're wearing. I walked into the ballroom like I owned the place. Because I did. Madison saw me first. Her eyes went wide and she started walking toward me with that panicked expression that meant she was about to try to control the situation. "Mom," she hissed when she got close enough. "What are you doing here? I thought you weren't coming. And why are you so dressed up? This isn't... you don't have to try so hard." Try so hard, as if wearing a decent dress to my own daughter's engagement party was somehow showing off. "Hello, Madison," I said calmly. "I wouldn't miss this for the world." Before she could respond, Mrs. Ashford descended upon us like a velvet-covered hurricane. She looked me up and down with the kind of assessment usually reserved for livestock auctions. "And you must be Madison's mother," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "How nice of you to make it. Madison mentioned you were quite busy with your little computer job." My little computer job? The one that paid for the venue she was standing in? "Yes," I said with a smile. "I managed to find time for family." Mrs. Ashford launched into a monologue about the Ashford family history, their properties, their connections, their importance. She mentioned their estate, their yacht, their memberships at various exclusive clubs. It was a performance designed to establish dominance, to make it clear that the Ashfords were the superior family in this union. Madison stood beside me, nodding eagerly, clearly impressed and desperately wanting to belong to this world. I just smiled and let Mrs. Ashford talk. She had no idea she was bragging to the woman who owned the ground she was standing on. The party officially started, and I watched as Madison transformed into someone I barely recognized. She laughed too loudly at Mrs. Ashford's jokes. She agreed with everything the woman said. She even started adopting Mrs. Ashford's manner of speaking, that clipped, affected tone that screamed old money and new pretension. At one point, Mrs. Ashford made a comment about how lucky Madison was to be marrying into the Ashford family, how it would give her access to circles she could never reach on her own. And Madison nodded. Actually nodded as if her own family wasn't good enough, as if I wasn't good enough. That's when I decided it was time to stop playing nice. I excused myself and headed to the hotel manager's office. David Chen, my right hand in this property, was waiting. He'd been keeping me updated via text about the situation. "The check from the Ashfords bounced," he said, handing me a folder. "Twice. And I did some digging like you asked. They're broke. 3 mortgages on the estate. The son's trust fund was emptied 2 years ago. About 15 maxed-out credit cards between them." "And the party costs?" I asked. $47,000, not including gratuity." I smiled. "Perfect. Let's give them a show." I walked back into the ballroom just as Mrs. Ashford was tapping a champagne glass to make a toast. She launched into a speech about family, legacy, and the importance of maintaining standards. She talked about how the Ashfords had always married well, always chosen partners who understood quality and breeding. The implication was clear. Madison was lucky to be chosen. I waited until she finished, until the polite applause died down. Then I stepped forward. "What a lovely speech," I said, my voice carrying across the ballroom. "I'd like to add a few words, if I may." Mrs. Ashford looked annoyed, but waved her hand magnanimously. "Of course, Mrs. Wong, please." I took the microphone from her and looked out at the crowd. Madison was staring at me with horror, clearly terrified of what her embarrassing mother might say. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate my daughter's engagement," I began. "It's wonderful to see so many people here in this beautiful venue. The Grand Meridian has always been one of my favorite properties." A few people nodded politely, not understanding the significance. "In fact," I continued, "I'm so fond of this hotel that 3 years ago, I bought it, along with the other 16 Grand Meridian properties across the country." The room went silent. Madison's face drained of all color. Mrs. Ashford's smile froze like it had been shellacked onto her face. "My name is Elizabeth Wong," I said clearly, "and I'm the owner of the Grand Meridian Hotel chain. The party you're all enjoying tonight, it's being held in my ballroom, served by my staff, using my resources. When the Ashfords requested to book this venue, I was happy to accommodate them. Family is important, after all." I pulled out my phone and pulled up the financial records David had given me. However, there seems to be a small problem. The check the Ashfords provided to pay for tonight's event has bounced. Twice, actually. Which is interesting because according to public records, the Ashford family is currently in significant financial difficulty. 3 mortgages on the estate, empty trust funds, 15 maxed-out credit cards. I projected the documents onto the screens around the room that were supposed to be showing the happy couple's photos. Instead, they showed property liens, court documents, and credit reports, all public information, all completely legal to access and share. Mrs. Ashford tried to speak, but no sound came out. Her husband had turned an alarming shade of purple, and Madison, my daughter, was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. "You were planning to use my daughter for money," I said, looking directly at Mrs. Ashford. "Money you thought her family had. You hired a private investigator to look into us. I have the invoice right here, charged to a credit card that's currently over its limit, by the way." The ballroom was in chaos. Guests were whispering. Some were openly recording on their phones. Brett, the groom, looked devastated. But I wasn't done yet. "Now," I announced, "let's discuss the bill for tonight's party. $47,000, not including gratuity. Since the Ashfords can't pay, and since this is technically their son's engagement party, I have 2 options. 1, I call the police and report theft of services, or 2, the Ashfords can leave now, quietly, and I'll absorb the cost as a gift to my daughter, assuming there's still going to be a wedding." Brett finally spoke up, surprising everyone. He turned to Madison with tears in his eyes and said he had no idea about his parents' schemes. He admitted he knew they were broke, but thought they were handling it with dignity, not by trying to con his fiancé's family. Madison was crying now, her carefully applied makeup running down her face. She looked at me, really looked at me for the first time all evening, and whispered, "You own this place? All of them? But I thought your online thing was just—" "My online thing was the platform I built to manage hotel bookings," I explained. "It became so successful that I used the profits to buy my first hotel, then another, then the entire chain. I tried to tell you multiple times, but you always changed the subject when I talked about work. You were too busy being embarrassed by your mother who worked too much and didn't dress well enough and didn't fit into the world you were trying to build. The Ashfords were trying to leave quietly, but I had one more card to play." "Mrs. Ashford," I said, "the gentleman you tried to bribe to sabotage this party, he's actually one of my security team. We have your entire conversation on tape, including the part where you discussed making the party fail so Madison would look bad and Brett would call off the engagement. Would you like me to play that for everyone?" She shook her head violently, grabbed her husband's arm, and practically ran for the exit. Brett tried to follow but stopped and turned back to Madison. "I'm so sorry," he said. "I had no idea. If you want to call off the engagement, I understand. I'll work to pay back the party costs. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." The ballroom cleared out pretty quickly after that. Nothing kills a party like finding out the hosts are broke and the bride's mother owns the venue. Madison and Brett sat at their table, surrounded by expensive centerpieces and broken dreams. My sister, Madison's aunt, who'd been silent through the entire ordeal, came over and hugged me. "I always knew you were up to something," she whispered. "I just didn't realize it was this." Madison finally stood up and walked over to me. Her shoulders were shaking and I expected anger. Instead, she threw her arms around me and sobbed into my shoulder. "I'm so sorry," she kept saying. "I'm so sorry. I was so ashamed of you. I thought you were just, I don't know, pathetic. Working all the time and never having anything to show for it. I couldn't see that you were building something amazing because I was too busy trying to be something I'm not." I hugged her back because despite everything, she was still my daughter. The little girl I'd rocked to sleep. The teenager I'd driven to school every morning. The woman I'd worked 3 jobs to put through college. "You want to know the really sad part?" I said. "If you'd just asked, I would have helped. No questions asked, but you never asked. You just assumed I had nothing to offer except embarrassment." Madison pulled back and looked at me, really looked at me. "When did you become so strong?" she asked. "I didn't become strong," I said. "I always was. I just had to be stronger than I wanted to be when your father died. Someone had to keep our family afloat, and it wasn't going to be you. You were in college, chasing your dreams. So I chased mine, quietly, in the background, while you were embarrassed that I worked too much and didn't have time for fancy things." Brett approached us nervously, like he was afraid I might have him thrown out. "Mrs. Wong," he said, "I understand if Madison wants to call off the engagement. My family, they're not who I thought they were. Or maybe they are, and I just didn't want to see it. Either way, I'm sorry for everything." Madison looked at him, then at me, then back at him. "Your parents are terrible," she said bluntly. "Like spectacularly terrible. But you stood up to them. You're nothing like them. So if you still want to marry me, knowing that I'm not the sophisticated girl you thought, that I've been pretending to be someone I'm not, and that I've been horrible to my amazing mother, then yes, I still want to marry you." It wasn't the most romantic moment I'd ever seen, but it was honest, and honesty was more than anyone had managed all evening. I offered Madison a job the next day, not out of pity, but because anyone who could organize an event with that many moving pieces, even if it was a disaster, had skills I could use. But she needed to learn humility. She needed to learn how to treat people with respect. And what better place to learn than starting from the bottom in the hotel industry? "You're going to work in every department," I told her. "Kitchen, housekeeping, front desk, everything. You're going to learn this business from the ground up, and you're going to personally apologize to every staff member you terrorized during the party planning." She nodded eagerly, mascara still streaked across her face. "I want to learn," she said. "I want to be like you, strong, independent, someone who builds things instead of just pretending to be impressive." Brett said he wanted to work too, to earn his own money for once instead of living off his family's fading reputation. I told him I'd find him something in our accounting department. Turns out he had a degree in finance his parents had never let him use. They'd wanted him to maintain the illusion of inherited wealth, not actually work for a living. The security guard from the beginning of the evening found me as I was leaving. He apologized about 17 times in 30 seconds. I told him he was just doing his job, but maybe next time he should look at people's faces instead of their clothes. "The woman you turned away from the front entrance could have been anyone," I said. "She could have been a hotel inspector, a mystery shopper, or as it turned out, the owner of the entire chain. Judge people by how they treat you, not by what they're wearing." He nodded so hard I thought his head might fall off. Felipe and the kitchen staff got the rest of the night off with full pay, plus a bonus for dealing with the chaos. The party food got donated to a local shelter, and the flowers went to a nearby nursing home. Nothing went to waste except the Ashfords' dignity, but they didn't have much of that to begin with. A week later, Madison started her first shift in housekeeping at 5 in the morning. She texted me a picture of herself in the uniform, smiling despite the early hour and the exhaustion in her eyes. "Day 1 of learning who I really want to be," she wrote. Brett was in the accounting department, discovering he was actually good at something other than looking impressive at country club events. He and Madison moved into a small apartment together, paying their own rent for the first time in their lives. They seemed happier than I'd ever seen them. No pretense, no performance, just two people figuring out who they were when they stopped trying to be who they thought they should be. As for the Ashfords, they lost their estate 2 months later. Mrs. Ashford tried to sue me for defamation, but it's hard to claim defamation when everything said about you is true and on video. They moved to Florida, where they're probably trying to con other unsuspecting families with eligible children. The security footage from that night became legendary among my staff. Someone set it to music, Gold Digger naturally, and it became our unofficial training video for how not to treat people based on their appearance. Madison and Brett got married a year later in a simple ceremony in my hotel's garden. No pretense, no lies. Just two people who'd learned the hard way that being yourself is always better than pretending to be someone you're not. Madison insisted on using the service entrance for her bridal entrance. She said it was where her real journey began, where her mother had been turned away and she hadn't even recognized her own flesh and blood. "I want to remember," she told me. "Every time I walk through a door, I want to remember that the person on the other side might be struggling, might be grieving, might be building something amazing while everyone else thinks they're nothing. Like you were, Mom. Like you still are." I walked her down the aisle that day, wearing a beautiful dress that I'd bought without worrying about the price tag. Not because I wanted to show off, but because I'd finally learned that I deserved nice things. That working hard and being invisible for so long didn't mean I had to stay invisible forever. Robert would have been proud, I think, of both of us. Of Madison for learning humility the hard way, of me for building something from nothing while raising our daughter alone, of the family we'd become, honest and imperfect, and finally real. The hotel business taught Madison something I couldn't have taught her any other way. When you clean someone's room, you see how they really live. When you serve someone food, you hear how they really talk when they think you don't matter. When you work the front desk, you learn that kindness costs nothing and cruelty costs everything. She worked every department for 6 months, and by the end she was a different person. Humbler, kinder, more aware of the people around her who made her life possible. One day she came to my office with a proposal. "I want to start a program," she said, "for young people who think success means having the right clothes and the right friends and the right image. I want to teach them what you taught me. That real success is building something that matters. That wealth without character is just numbers in a bank account. That the people who serve you deserve the same respect as the people you're trying to impress." I approved the program on the spot. We called it Ground Up, and it brought college students into the hotels to work every position from housekeeping to management. They learned the business from the bottom up, just like Madison had, and they learned what she'd learned, that everyone matters. That dignity isn't something you can buy. That character is built in the moments when you think no one is watching. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you've ever been invisible to your own family, share your experience. If you've ever been judged for your clothes instead of your character, tell me about it. If you've ever built something amazing while everyone thought you were struggling, I want to hear that story. Because we're all more than what people see when they look at us. We're all more than our clothes, our jobs, our addresses. We're the sum of our choices, our sacrifices, our quiet victories that no one else knows about. I built an empire in secret because I didn't need applause. I needed security for my daughter. I needed to prove to myself that I could survive my husband's death and come out stronger. I needed to know that I was more than just a widow, more than just a mother, more than just a woman in worn-out clothes who got turned away at the service entrance. You want to know the hardest part? It wasn't building the business. It wasn't the 18-hour days or the sleepless nights coding or the constant fear of failure. The hardest part was watching my daughter grow ashamed of me while I was working myself to the bone to secure her future. Every time she made an excuse about why I couldn't meet her friends, every time she asked me not to come to her work events, every time she introduced me as just my mom with that apologetic tone, it broke something inside me. But I kept going, because that's what mothers do. We keep going even when our children can't see us, even when they're embarrassed by us, even when they think we're nothing special. We keep building, keep fighting, keep sacrificing because love doesn't need recognition to exist. Robert used to say I was the strongest person he knew. I never believed him until he was gone, and I had to be strong enough for both of us. Those first months after his death were the darkest of my life. The medical bills kept coming. The creditors kept calling. Madison was away at college, oblivious, and I couldn't bear to tell her the truth, that her brilliant, successful father had left us with nothing but debt and memories. So I learned to code from YouTube videos at 2 a.m. I taught myself web design, platform architecture, database management. Every night after working my 3 jobs, I'd come home and study until my eyes burned and my fingers cramped. I built that first booking platform in 6 months. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. And when a larger company offered me $200,000 for it, I cried for 3 hours. Not because of the money, though God knows we needed it, but because it meant I'd done something right, that I could survive this, that Robert's death hadn't destroyed me. I used that money to buy a failing hotel in a small town 2 hours away. Everyone thought I was crazy. A widow in her 50s with no hotel experience, buying a property that was bleeding money. But I saw potential. I saw a building that just needed someone to care about it, someone to fix the roof and update the rooms and train the staff to actually care about guests. 6 months later, that hotel was profitable. A year later, I bought another one, then another. Each property taught me something new. Each success gave me the courage to dream bigger. And each time Madison visited, oblivious to what I was building, asking why I still lived in the same small house and wore the same old clothes, I bit my tongue and said nothing. Because I was building this for her, building security she'd never have to worry about, building a legacy she'd inherit someday, even if she didn't appreciate it now. The night of her engagement party, when she looked at me like I was an embarrassment, like I was something to hide from her fancy in-laws, I made a decision. It was time to stop being invisible. Time to stop protecting her from the truth. Time to show her what real strength looks like. And when I stood in that ballroom and revealed everything, when I saw the shock on her face and the horror on Mrs. Ashford's face and the chaos that followed, I didn't feel victorious. I felt sad. Sad that it had come to this, that my own daughter needed to see my bank account before she could see my worth. But here's what I've learned in the year since that night. Sometimes people need to hit rock bottom before they can climb back up. Madison needed to see how close she'd come to becoming Mrs. Ashford, needed to understand that wealth without character is just a prettier kind of poverty, needed to work in every department of my hotels to understand that the people who clean your rooms and cook your food and serve your drinks are not invisible. They're human beings with dreams and struggles and dignity that deserves respect. Watching her transform over those 6 months was like watching her grow up all over again. But this time, she was growing into someone real, someone I was proud of not because of what she had, but because of who she was becoming. The day she came to me with the idea for Ground Up, I knew she'd finally learned the lesson. That success isn't about impressing people. It's about building something that matters and lifting others up along the way. Brett surprised me too. He'd spent his whole life living in the shadow of his family's fading glory, never believing he could be anything more than a trust fund kid with a famous last name. But once he started working in our accounting department, once he discovered he was actually good at something, he came alive. He proposed to Madison again, properly this time, with a ring he'd bought with his own money from his own paycheck. It wasn't as big as the first ring, the one his parents had pressured him to buy with money he didn't have. But it meant more, because it was real. Their wedding was small and honest and beautiful. We held it in the hotel garden where Madison had worked as a server during her training, where she'd carried plates and refilled water glasses and learned that there's no shame in hard work. She invited every staff member who'd helped with the original disastrous engagement party. She apologized to each one personally and thanked them for teaching her, through their example, what grace under pressure looks like. The wedding had no five-star chef or imported flowers or champagne chilled to exactly 37.5 degrees. We had good food, local flowers, and champagne at whatever temperature it happened to be. And it was perfect, because it was real, because it was about love, not performance. Because my daughter had finally learned that the people who matter don't care about expensive things, and the expensive things don't matter to people who truly love you. I walked her down the aisle wearing a dress that cost more than our first car. Not because I needed to prove anything, but because I'd finally learned that I deserved nice things. That being frugal and invisible for so long didn't mean I had to stay that way forever. Robert would have loved to see her like this, honest, happy, free from the weight of pretending to be someone she wasn't. Sometimes I talk to him late at night when I'm alone in our house that I still haven't moved out of. I tell him about the empire I built from his hospital bills and funeral costs, about how our daughter almost lost herself trying to impress people who weren't worth impressing, about how she found her way back. I think he knows. I think somehow, wherever he is, he sees what I've built, not just the hotels and the money and the success, but the woman I became, when I had to be strong enough for both of us, the mother who loved her daughter enough to let her fail, the widow who turned grief into gold. That security guard still works for me, by the way. He's one of my best employees now. He tells every new hire about the day he turned away the owner at the front door. And he tells them what I told him. Look at people's character, not their clothes. Listen to how they treat the people who serve them, and never assume you know someone's worth by looking at what they're wearing. Because the woman in the worn-out jeans might be the person who signs your paycheck, and the mother you're embarrassed by might be the strongest person you'll ever know. I still dress simply most days, still drive the same car, still live in the same house where Robert and I raised Madison, not because I can't afford better, but because these things are enough. Because happiness doesn't come from impressing strangers. It comes from knowing who you are, from building something that matters, from loving people even when they can't see you. Madison works with me now, not for me. She's earned her place through hard work and humility, and every time she sees someone being dismissed because of how they look, she steps in, because she remembers what it feels like to be blind to someone's worth. Thank you for listening to my story. Remember, you are more than what people see when they look at you. You are your struggles and your victories, your grief and your resilience, your quiet moments of courage when no one is watching. Never let anyone make you feel invisible. Never let anyone convince you that your worth is determined by your clothes or your job or your bank account. The strongest people are the ones who've been through hell and came out still fighting, still building, still believing that they matter, and you matter. You've always mattered, even when the people who should see you are looking right through you, even when you're the invisible woman at the service entrance, even when you're the embarrassing mother in old clothes. You matter, and someday the people who couldn't see you will finally open their eyes. And when they do, make sure they see someone they can be proud of, not because of what you have, but because of who you are.